Ultimate Spider-Man Incursion is probably the most important comic book for Miles Morales and the Ultimate Universe, and even Doctor Doom right now, that seemingly nobody's talking about. Not even Marvel is talking about it, which is kind of weird, because Doctor Doom learns his true origin in this comic book. So, we covered the first issue a while ago, and then I figured I'd just wait until the whole thing finished, because issue by issue, it was okay. And the long and short of it is that Miles Morales has traveled to the new Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics in order to find his sister, who was basically whisked away by an artifact that was left behind in the main Marvel Universe by the Maker. And so ultimately, his sister fell into the hands of Storm and Eric Killmonger from the new Ultimate Universe Black Panther line of comics. And unlike what we're traditionally familiar with, right, which is that Storm and Black Panther get together, in this one it's Storm and Eric Killmonger. The funny thing about it is that they're also allies with Ultimate Black Panther. And what T'Challa does is he actually studies the artifact. And the fact that it has energy that historically belongs to the Maker is of pause for concern here. But much like the main Marvel Universe in Marvel Comics, Wakanda is kind of cut off from the rest of the world, isolated and exceedingly advanced technologically. But the concern here by Shuri is that because it is energy that's resonating with the Maker's power, their big concern here is that it can be used to unlock the city that currently has the Maker imprisoned. Now, we know the city is going to open up at the end of the 2-year period, but they're concerned that it's going to open up prematurely. And so at that point, you switch over to Miles himself. Now, in the first issue, Miles had basically stumbled across Wasp and Ant-Man, right? Two members of the Ultimates who were basically on their own individual mission, right? Looking for Miles because he has suddenly arrived in this universe, and the fact that the Maker's energy was just kind of traveling around, people were hunting for it, and so Miles ends up allying with them, just because of the fact that he's aware of who they are, if only because of his own universe. Now, what's interesting about this, and the one question that a lot of people are going to ask here is, does Miles remember anything about his original Ultimate Universe? And the answer is no, right? The answer is that he actually doesn't recall any of this stuff. Marvel's toyed with it, but for the most part, none of the memories are really coming back here. And in fact, that's referenced in this particular situation, because one of the things that happens is that Miles makes reference to the Avengers, right, in his own universe. And Wasp just tells him, right, we're not the Avengers, we're the Ultimates, right? We have what we have, because Miles is kind of giving them a hard time about the fact that they don't have like teleporters, quick travel, or anything along those lines. And Miles seems just a little off-put by the whole thing. And when they ask him what's wrong, he says it's nothing, right? Every time you say that name, the Ultimates, I feel like I've heard it before. And this is the theme that Marvel goes with Miles, right? Like, he seems to kind of remember bits and elements, but doesn't really remember anything. It just seems familiar to him, and that's really it. But in the midst of this whole conversation, they're suddenly attacked by the Wakandans. Now, of course, it's their goal to travel to Wakanda because their journey basically led them to believe that Miles' sister Billy is with the Wakandans. But in the Ultimate Universe, the Wakandans are every bit as cutthroat, and I wouldn't say brutal, but I would say cautious as they are in the main Marvel Universe, in the sense that anyone who stumbles upon their shores, they're quick to basically neutralize that threat as fast as possible. But what's really interesting about this version of the Wakandans, specifically the Dora Milaje, right, and this is kind of how it's unfolding in the Black Panther comics in the Ultimate Universe, is that they're quick on the trigger. Specifically when like Miles and Wasp and Janet are here, they just kind of say, like, we need to speak to King T'Challa, right? We feel like he might have something or someone that belongs to us. And the Dora Milaje immediately believe that these guys are a credible threat and are going to try to attack and kill T'Challa. Now, a lot of this seems to be rooted in the fact that Miles has a vibranium suit. Now, that was covered in the Miles Morales comic books, which is a phenomenal comic book run. The long and short of it is that because he had become a vampire after being attacked by Blade, that they basically cured him of his vampirism. But along the way, Black Panther and the main Marvel Universe gave Miles a vibranium suit. And so now that Miles has it here, this version of Black Panther and even this version of the Wakandans believe he's some kind of a spy that's stolen from them and is using their own tech against them. And so once Black Panther actually shows up, right, once T'Challa appears, then at that point, it's just kind of like, yeah, we need to have a conversation, right? We need to talk and find out what's going on. Now, one of the things to know about Ultimate Spider-Man Incursion is that it kind of does time skips, right? It jumps around, and it doesn't necessarily show us every nook and cranny about what's going on in the Ultimate Universe, or the new Ultimate Universe, with Miles being here. A good example of this is that when Black Panther shows up, that Miles just says, hey, can we like talk for a second? And then you just jump ahead, right? Only really by maybe a few minutes, but you jump ahead nonetheless. The reason being because Storm and of course Eric Killmonger, left Miles' sister under the protection of Wakandans, only to find out that one of them is a spy, basically working for the Illuminati, right? The Council of the Maker. And that's kind of what's going on here. It's almost like a space race, right? The fact that this girl arrived here from an alternate reality with Maker energy, or at least an artifact that belonged to the Maker, everyone believes they can use it for their own ends. So everyone's chasing after her for that purpose and trying to capture her, all basically trying to gain the Maker's favor. And we'll find out what that means here in a minute. But of course, once Miles and Black Panther and these guys arrive on the scene where Miles' sister Billy was previously at, only to find out she's basically been taken, that's a little bit of a time skip. And so at that point, Black Panther and the Ultimates ally. Now this is kind of a kicker and kind of a weird little thing that goes on here, because across the Ultimate Universe line of comics, no one's really crossed over yet, at least not in a meaningful way. Black Panther hasn't really crossed over with the Ultimates in a meaningful way. This is them seemingly teaming up for the very first time. The Ultimates team themselves haven't really crossed over with like Ultimate Wolverine, Peach Momoko's X-Men, none of that stuff. And so it's kind of strange that it's all sort of happening in a comic over there that Marvel's not really giving a whole lot of attention to. But it is cool nonetheless. And so what ends up happening is that as this spy is making her way out of Wakanda, she's immediately killed by the Silver Samurai, who basically works for the glory of Sunfire and Hinokuni. Now, this is where you get into Peach Momoko's X-Men, and a little bit of an explanation about this, that the X-Men title isn't necessarily for everybody. It is cool, but it's not the X-Men as you would expect them. The reality here is that it's really more New Mutants. Marvel simply just slapped the X-Men name on it. The reality here is that in the Ultimate Universe, Peach Momoko's X-Men is New Mutants. Ultimate Wolverine is the Ultimate X-Men, but Marvel's just kind of changing names in order to try to drive readership more than anything else. The reality, though, is that with Peach Momoko's X-Men, it's really more of kind of like a secret society of X-Men, right? They call themselves that, but again, they're really more of a New Mutants team. And the two individuals that actually appear here are Nico and May. Now, they're the ones that essentially formed, right, the secret society of X-Men within the Ultimate Universe, bringing together those younger students to basically combat what is in effect the Shadow King. Now, it was the Shadow King possessing somebody else, but it was the Shadow King nonetheless. Keep in mind, in Marvel Comics, the Shadow King, as this kind of nightmarish entity, does not have a singular version across every universe. The Shadow King is multiversal, right? Like, he exists in every universe, or can appear in and out of any universe across the multiverse. As far as I'm aware, there has not been a reference in the X-Men comics in the main Marvel universe where the Shadow King talks about what he's done in the Ultimate Universe. I have no doubt that in due time, that will probably happen if it hasn't happened already. Truth to tell, I'm not as current on the X-Men as I possibly could be. But the fact is, right, that with Miles here working alongside Nico and May, they don't know him. And so, of course, they immediately attack him. But because of the language barrier, they don't easily understand each other. And in fact, it's not until a universal translator is invoked that they can start understanding what everybody else is saying. And when I say like a universal translator, it's an app on their phone. It's an app on their phone that just translates everything. But that's kind of the funny thing here, is because Miles makes reference to the X-Men, and they ask the question, who are you and how do you know about the X-Men? And he simply just says, I'm Spider-Man, right? And again, kind of filling them in on how he knows about the X-Men kind of happens off panel. To a degree. A lot of those conversations, as important as they may be, take place between everything else that's going on. Now, the reality here is it's not a bad thing. I mean, we know who Miles is. We know how Miles knows about the X-Men. So Marvel doesn't necessarily have to walk our hand through how Miles knows these things. In fact, what we end up doing is shifting over to a conversation between basically Silver Samurai and Emmanuel DaCosta. Now, Emmanuel DaCosta, of course, historically the father of Robert DaCosta, is actually presented in the Ultimate Universe as far more sinister and twisted, that instead what he does is he actually feeds on the blood of various mutants and then uses their powers that way. But he's very much a manipulator, a schemer operating behind the scenes. And that's why Viper makes the statement, right? DaCosta, this line is reserved for the Emperor himself. How in the world did you access this? And he simply just says, I know that you have something I want, and I'm here to make an offer. Name your price. And the question they have is like, our price, like, we serve the Emperor. And Emmanuel just kind of cuts him off, right? And it's like, he's had possession of the anomaly for weeks and done nothing. Likely, he would be grateful to be relieved of the burden. And Emmanuel just tells him, you are out of your depth, dear Viper. I have experience with gifted children. I know how to handle them. I fund a school, my own son. I can make you wealthy beyond your wildest dreams. Or you can die defending something that you do not understand. Now, let's kind of scale out for a second, and let's talk about the nature of mutants in the new Ultimate Universe. The reality here is that the Ultimate Universe up to this point hasn't done a lot of exploration with the mutant population. And in a lot of ways, where this story kind of hops and skips around and doesn't really explain a whole lot of things, that's kind of what's going on with the Ultimate Universe, because everything in this first 2 years of the new Ultimate Universe has been world building, only for Marvel to chop it off at the knees and literally cancel it, right? It's really kind of stupid what it is that they're doing. But the fact is, when it comes to the mutant population, they're scattered everywhere because of the actions of the Maker and quite literally breaking how this universe was supposed to unfold, that some mutants have been captured by the Eurasian Republic. So Magic, Colossus, and Omega Red. And they use these mutants for their own ends. Mutants like Wolverine had basically been inducted into the Weapons Plus program and then were taken by the Eurasian Republic and turned into the Winter Soldier. That the X-Men, as we might traditionally know them, Nightcrawler, Gambit, that they're part of a resistance force, but they're constantly losing and they're on the edge of complete and total destruction. They're one failed campaign away from total annihilation. You have Pete Moko's X-Men, which again is more of a New Mutants story. Emmanuel DaCosta is literally kidnapping mutants and using their powers in order to achieve his own goals. It's just kind of scattered, right? There's sticks in the wind. They're all over the place. There's no real unified mutant front in the Ultimate Universe. And so that's why you don't really see much in the way of organization. Not only that, Miles and May, kind of switching back to them, do develop some measure of rapport here, right? Camaraderie. I don't know if I would call it romance, but maybe something akin to it is starting to blossom, simply because of the fact that Miles' only real focus in being in this new Ultimate Universe is rescuing his sister. And the funny thing about this is that he simply says, I'm grateful for all of your all's help letting me crash here, but I'm frustrated that I haven't been able to find my sister. And he says, actually, I think what I really am scared of is losing everything again, just like I did in my old universe. All these memories are flooding back, and I keep thinking about what it felt like to see my old universe die. And he says, I felt almost as hopeless as things do now. I can't imagine how scared Billy must be. And so this is an important statement here, because this is about the extent of Miles' memories. But one of the things that you guys are going to see here in a little while is that this seems to just conflict itself, right? It seems to create a kind of contradiction in terms of what Miles does and doesn't remember. He does seem to remember that his universe came to an end, but that's kind of the extent of it. And in fact, that was kind of confirmed in Spider-Man 2 from Brian Michael Bendis when he tried to bring the original Ultimate Universe back, but didn't necessarily succeed. That Miles was brought to the original Ultimate Universe, which had somehow been restored by Peter Parker's Spider-Man. So Peter remembered, but Miles didn't really remember anything else. Now, your mileage may vary on whether or not that little bit of history matters, just because of the fact that Marvel has just kind of pretended as if that whole era where Brian Michael Bendis was trying to bring back the original Ultimate Universe as if it never happened. And so as far as this new one goes, and it's one of the things that we've reiterated in our videos about Miles, you can just kind of go from like Secret Wars 2015, jumping into Ultimate Invasion, and pretend like nothing with the original Ultimate Universe ever returned, and just kind of call it a day, right? For the most part, it would make sense. But the fact is, right, where May and Miles end up figuring out where his sister's at and basically invade the facility of Silver Samurai in order to rescue Billy, they're interrupted by Magic, who shows up, grabs Billy, and teleports away. And in fact, you end up finding out the only reason Magic even knew where Billy was because Emmanuel DaCosta had told Magic where Billy was. So again, kind of manipulating behind the scenes. And so at that point, with Magic and Colossus and Omega Red operating out of the Eurasian Republic, it's only a matter of time before Miles and May figure out where they are. Now, one of the cool things that goes on here, and it's kind of been referenced to a degree in the Ultimate X-Men comics, is the fact that the Ultimate X-Men are aware of other mutants that exist out there in the world, even if they haven't necessarily crossed over in a meaningful way. For May, she's actually really interested in Storm. And And it's one of these funny things because she asks, right, can you tell me about her, right? Can you tell me about Storm? And Miles just says, right, like, I've only really met her once, but in my universe, she's like the mutant, which is true, right? Like, it's one of the coolest things that Marvel's done. They've really elevated the profile of Storm. And Miles just says, right, she's one of the strongest mutants. In fact, folks even call her a goddess. She's nice too, right? And I bet you guys would hit it off if you ever met, which is probably a true statement. Storm's awesome. She's amazing until you piss her off. And then she's not so nice anymore. But where the two of them have a bit of conversation, right, a bit of banter back and forth, and then kind of settle down for the night, Miles is suddenly visited by Anansi, right, the spider god. And this is one of the cool things that came from the Miles Morales comics, specifically in his conflict with Black Panther when he got the vibranium suit. And one of the things that Anansi had kind of established here was that he had sort of chosen Miles to be his main avatar, so to speak. The idea being that Miles would undergo various trials, tribulations, things along those lines. But this is a cool revelation because it shows that the Web of Life and Destiny is still very much a part of this particular story. The Web of Life and Destiny basically being the web that connects all Spider-Man and Spider-Women from across the multiverse, and that Anansi, basically being the patron god of the spiders, appears to Miles here in being able to access different universes. But one of the things that he talks about is that his connection with Miles is not as strong as it will be as time goes on. So he's limited, and so his ability to influence and exert his powers on Miles in this universe are very, very limited, i.e. he can't get Miles home. Right? He cannot like take Miles and his sister, teleport him back to safety and call it a day. So truth to tell, I mean, from Dennis Camp and Cody Ziegler, it's just a way to keep the story going. But one of the things that Anansi does tell him is that there are going to be future trials and tribulations, that they're all going to come out of this moment now. So it's essentially Marvel saying this story will be important for the future of Miles in the main Marvel universe when he inevitably makes it back. So it is a cool little tidbit there. But once Miles' discussion with Anansi is essentially done, they may kind of ask him, right, who are you talking to? And he's like, oh, it's nobody, it's just the wind and that kind of thing. And then that's basically it. But this ultimately leads to Miles and May confronting Illyana Rasputin. And Illyana, as she exists in the Ultimate Universe, is far more extreme and intense than the way that she exists in the main Marvel Universe. A lot of that is just kind of a byproduct of these two different realities and how they function. That truth to tell, despite Illyana having a pretty sketchy upbringing, spending time in limbo in the main Marvel Universe, different things like that, that the reality is that she had a pretty, I guess, a relatively easygoing life in comparison to her younger life, right? Being a part of the X-Men, facing off against threats here and there, different things like that. But in this reality, the Maker screwed everything up. So it's very much a broken universe. It's a place of testing, a place of trials. If you do not stay on your guard, someone will kill you. And so that's why you end up finding out that when basically Captain Britain in the Ultimate Universe had launched a campaign to steal Billy away from Illyana Rasputin, where she basically destroys his forces, Miles and May show up and confront Illyana. And it's why Miles makes this statement and saying that she's far more aggressive in this universe than the one that he comes from. And again, because of the ferocity of the battle, there's not a whole lot of time for like Miles to say something to May and then for May to pull up her phone and listen to the translation and see what it says. And so in the heat of battle, they can't necessarily communicate that well. So it really just kind of comes down to Miles using hand gestures, right? Demonstrating the fact that he wants to team up, and then May picking up what he's putting down and the two of them working together to at least momentarily overcome Illyana. And so while that whole conflict is taking place, Emmanuel DaCosta is using the moment to kidnap Billy. Specifically, he shows up here with Longshot and with Blink, right? Blink being a teleporter, Longshot having the power to bend luck to his side. Probably the two best mutants to have under almost any circumstance. I will say it does kind of suck to see them just here in a side story and just kind of being used in this way, and then we just never see them again. But it does allow Emmanuel to grab Billy and then teleport out. Of course, the goal basically being to grab Billy and bring her directly to the city, right? The giant prison that the Maker is currently locked in, with the intention of freeing the Maker and then basically showing that he was the one that opened the city in the first place, essentially ingratiating himself to the Maker, right? In the hopes that he can gain the Maker's favor. And that's kind of what everybody's doing here. But here's where Emmanuel becomes one of the coolest individuals in this story, and here's how it all ties into Doctor Doom. Because when Emmanuel shows up in the city, because of the fact that Magic wants Billy for herself, so she can ingratiate herself to the Maker and gain gain the Maker's favor, her and Miles and May basically team up, right? The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so what ends up happening is when they confront Emmanuel, you end up finding out that Emmanuel actually has all these blood patches that he has hooked up to himself. And what it does is it allows him to essentially use a variety of different powers, which includes Cyclops' optic beams. Now, here's an important distinction to understand. Yes, we saw Cyclops in Ultimate Wolverine, and where your initial inclination may be to ask the question, how can this be, right? How can he be in two places at once? All Emmanuel needs is blood. He doesn't need like the actual person. It helps when he has the person because he can draw on their blood for a prolonged period of time. But with what he expects to be a short form battle like this, he doesn't need the whole person. And so it's cool to see him firing off optic blasts, right? Just taking on all these various mutant powers, telepathy, so on and so forth. And it's kind of nuts because he basically starts overcoming pretty much everybody who's here, which includes Ileana. And in fact, he tricks her mind into believing that she's experiencing her own personal hell. So there's certainly Jason Wingard powers here, right? Mastermind or Quentin Quire. I'm more inclined to believe that it's Quentin or Psylocke, given the fact that you've got that pink display when his power is being used. But historically, whenever Psylocke used her abilities, it came in the form of a butterfly on her face. So there's no real reason to believe that it is actually Psylocke. But the point here is that he's just dominating everybody. And so what he ends up doing is he seizes control of Miles Morales. And this is where the story changes. And that's why this story is so important, not just for Dr. Doom, but even for Miles. Because when Emmanuel takes control of Miles, he says, now, let us see what secrets you hold, Traveler. And he jumps into Miles's mind. And Miles sees the original Ultimate Universe, where this original Ultimate Universe is basically destroyed, right? And he says, I see, you fear failure. And where Miles is momentarily able to snap back and get the upper hand on Emmanuel, even if only for a moment, the Ultimates arrive here. And where the Ultimates start battling Emmanuel, in the midst of all this chaos and all this pandemonium, Miles is sent flying through a building only to basically come across Spider number 42. Now, some of you guys may remember that, some of you guys may not. That's the spider that originally bit Miles Morales in the original Ultimate Universe, Earth 1610. Miles goes to touch it, and when he does, everything snaps back, and he says, I see it, and I remember it. Everything. The bite, the mask, the power, the responsibility. When he first gained his powers, when he initially donned the mantle of Spider-Man after the death of Peter Parker during the original Ultimate Universe, and that people kind of turned against him, they didn't want him to be Spider-Man, when he started acting as a superhero, after basically people began to accept the fact that he was Spider-Man, when he joined the Ultimates team, right? The fear, the death of his mom at the hands of Venom, the offer that was made in Secret Wars 2015, when he met the Molecule Man. All these memories that he had long since forgotten are now back. So Miles remembers the full totality of his history, and that's how it ties in to Doom. Because the Ultimates show up here while She-Hulk is basically dealing with Emmanuel, and there's a conversation that goes on between Miles and the rest of the team. That Iron Lad, Tony Stark, goes running up to this catalyst thing, and he just says the catalyst, right? The superheroic catalyst. We've been raiding the Maker's facilities for months and taking them. This was actually the first place that we hit, but we weren't able to get them all. And he says there should be dozens here, but there's only a few. DaCosta must have basically cleared them all out. That what Emmanuel was doing was basically building his own version of origin boxes, right? Using the blood of people that existed out there. And so at that point, they're simply trying to figure out what to do with them. Because Captain America's response is like, let's grab them and go. But Tony says, that'd still leave too much to chance, Steve. If the Council creates an army with these, it would be over for the Ultimates. We need a more certain solution to basically take these destabilized ones, seemingly the ones that belong to some of the most powerful beings in existence, and send them to some place that no one can get to. And that's where Miles chimes in, and he says, I can take them and then place them in my universe. I can give them to the Avengers. My Ultimates, they deal with this kind of stuff all the time. They'll make it so that the Maker will never be able to get them. And so at that point, the Ultimates are like, I mean, That's a really good idea, actually. Let's whisk these things away, which is exactly what Miles intends to do. And so for the most part, Emmanuel is dealt with pretty quickly, right? He's defeated pretty fast. Magic teleports out because she's like, I don't want to have anything to do with anything that's going on here. And so that's when you have Miles conversing with Dr. Doom, because what Dr. Doom does is he reverse engineers the card that was left behind by the Maker, the artifact that was accidentally activated by Billy that brought her to this universe in the first place, and where Miles ultimately followed her. And the conversation between them is awesome, because at that point, Dr. Doom says, Maker technology is convoluted and advanced, but I spent years assisting him. I find it all somehow intuitive. And Miles says, a world where Dr. Doom is a superhero, that's crazy. And Doom asks him, he says, do you have a Doom in your reality? And Miles says, where I come from, actually both places that I come from, he's one of the world's greatest minds. And Doom asks, do you have a Maker as well? And Miles says, kind of, right? I'm pretty sure my original universe is where your Maker came from. And Doom is just kind of like, what are you talking about? And he's like, do you know the Maker's true origin? And Miles says, yes, right? It all came back to me here, that I must have buried the memories or something, that I had this whole other life in a whole other universe. We had our own Spider-Man, our own X-Men, our own Fantastic Four. We had our own Ultimates, not Avengers, but Ultimates. And I guess that means it was more like this place. And so Doom asks him, right, you know how the Maker came to be? And Miles says, yeah, of course. In my first universe, he started out as a hero, one of the first, but things took a turn. He took a turn, and he created the city. He tried to take over the world and almost succeeded. He said he was trying to protect it. And he says, anyway, good luck with him, right? From what I remember, he's one nasty dude. And Doom just kind of muses to himself, right? Like the Maker, the person that tortured this reality's version of Reed Richards and turned Reed into Dr. Doom, right? He's like, the Maker started out as a hero. Like, that's kind of nuts. And Miles like, yeah, man, can you believe it? He went by Mr. Fantastic, but his real name was Reed Richards. Anyway, peace, and like bails out. And leaves Doom on this massive cliffhanger. So if you guys remember our coverage in the most recent video that we did on the Ultimates, where Dr. Doom was talking about who the Maker really was, and he was kind of questioning himself, right? The idea that like the Maker was him, just from an alternate reality, and that in another universe, referencing the main Marvel universe, he could have been a superhero. This is where it all comes from. It's just kind of shocking that like Marvel never tied these together or advertised these two things together. I mean, Dennis Camp was doing it all over Twitter, but the fact that like Marvel as a company was not like advertising this book as being probably the most important book in the entirety of Marvel publishing right now, if you are interested in the Ultimate Universe or Ultimate Doctor Doom, that's kind of shocking here, right? But ultimately the story just kind of ends, right? With Miles being teleported back to the main Marvel Universe, his sister safe, everything's seemingly fine. And he just kind of tells him, right? Like, I have something to tell you, right? Something that I have to fill you in on. But the box, the origin devices that he brought from the Ultimate Universe, it's still here. And so we're kind of left on this cliffhanger of when in the world's going to come of it. I have no idea. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. As much as I love Cody Ziegler and Dennis Camp, the story kind of felt rushed, to be honest with you guys. Not a terrible story, but it's certainly not their best work. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.